The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Captain Morrison watched the new recruits line up for weapons training. Among them stood Sarah Chen, a quiet woman in her late 20s who had transferred from another division. Her personnel file was surprisingly thin, containing only basic information and a note about previous combat experience in Afghanistan. Morrison had been training soldiers for 15 years, and he could usually read people within minutes. But Sarah was different. She moved with a fluidity that spoke of real combat experience, yet she remained almost invisible among the other recruits. While others chatted nervously or showed off their knowledge, she simply observed everything with sharp, calculating eyes. The weapons training began with standard rifles. Morrison demonstrated proper handling techniques, watching as each recruit took their turn. Most fumbled with the basics, their movements awkward and uncertain. When Sarah's turn came, she stepped forward without hesitation. Her stance was perfect, her grip natural, as if the weapon was an extension of her body. She fired 3 shots in quick succession. All 3 hit the center of the target with surgical precision. The other recruits fell silent, staring at the impossibly tight grouping on the target. Morrison raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Lucky shots happen sometimes, even with beginners. The training continued throughout the morning. Sarah consistently outperformed everyone, but she did it quietly without drawing attention to herself. She helped struggling recruits with their stance, offered quiet encouragement, and never bragged about her own performance. Morrison found himself increasingly curious about this mysterious woman. During the lunch break, he pulled Sarah aside. The shooting range was empty except for the 2 of them, the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. Morrison had brought out his personal rifle, an MRAD precision weapon that he had used during his own deployment years ago. It was his pride and joy, meticulously maintained and perfectly calibrated. "I want to see what you can really do," he said, handing her the rifle. "There's a target at 800 yards. Think you can hit it?" Sarah examined the weapon carefully, checking the scope and feeling the weight. Something shifted in her demeanor. The quiet recruit facade seemed to fall away, replaced by the focused intensity of a professional warrior. She positioned herself, adjusted the scope slightly, and took aim. The first shot rang out across the range. Through his binoculars, Morrison saw the bullet strike dead center. Sarah chambered another round and fired again. Another perfect hit. She was about to take a 3rd shot when the rifle jammed. Morrison expected frustration or embarrassment. Instead, Sarah calmly set the rifle down and began field stripping it with movements so quick and practiced they were almost a blur. Within seconds, she had identified and cleared the jam, reassembled the weapon, and was ready to continue. "Where did you learn to do that?" Morrison asked, genuinely impressed. Sarah's expression remained neutral. "You pick things up," she said simply. But Morrison wasn't satisfied with that answer. He had seen many soldiers, from green recruits to seasoned veterans. Sarah's skills were beyond anything he had encountered. The way she handled weapons, her situational awareness, the almost supernatural calm she displayed. These weren't things you picked up in basic training. As the afternoon training session began, Morrison made a decision. He was going to find out who Sarah Chen really was. Her file might be thin, but someone with her abilities didn't just appear out of nowhere. There had to be a story, and Morrison was determined to uncover it. The other recruits gathered around as Sarah demonstrated advanced shooting positions. She moved through each stance flawlessly, her shots consistently finding their marks at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. Morrison watched from the sidelines, his suspicions growing stronger with each perfect shot. Something about Sarah's hands caught his attention. They were steady and sure, but he noticed small scars along her knuckles and a barely visible mark on her trigger finger, the kind of callus that only came from thousands of hours of practice. These weren't the hands of someone who had just picked things up. As the sun began to set over the training ground, Morrison knew he was looking at something extraordinary. Sarah Chen was not just another recruit. She was a mystery wrapped in military fatigues. And every instinct Morrison had developed over his years of service told him that there was much more to her story than anyone realized. The question that haunted him as he watched her pack up her gear was simple. Who was Sarah Chen, and what was she hiding? Little did he know that the answer would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true cost of war. That evening, Captain Morrison sat in his office long after the base had grown quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he stared at Sarah Chen's file on his computer screen. Something wasn't adding up. Her transfer papers showed she had served in a support role in Afghanistan. But her skills suggested something entirely different. Morrison had contacts throughout the military network, people who owed him favors from his years of service. He started making calls. The first few led nowhere, dead ends and classified information stamps. But on his fourth call to an old friend who worked in military intelligence, he hit something interesting. Sarah Chen, his friend repeated over the secure line. There was a long pause. Morrison, you need to be very careful with this one. I can't tell you much, but that name is attached to some very classified operations. The line went dead, leaving Morrison staring at his phone. Classified operations. His suspicions were confirmed, but now he had more questions than answers. What kind of operations, and why was someone with that background training with regular recruits? The next morning brought new challenges. Morrison had planned advanced combat scenarios for the training group, exercises designed to test their tactical thinking and teamwork. The recruits would work in pairs, navigating through a mock urban environment while engaging targets and avoiding obstacles. Sarah was paired with Jackson, a confident young man who had been vocal about his shooting experience back home. Morrison watched through binoculars as the teams moved through the course. Most struggled with coordination, communication breaking down under the pressure of simulated combat. But Sarah and Jackson moved differently. While Jackson called out observations and suggested tactics, Sarah seemed to anticipate threats before they appeared. She guided her partner through the course with subtle hand signals and whispered directions that showed an understanding of urban warfare that went far beyond basic training. At one point, their path was blocked by a scenario designed to test problem-solving skills. Multiple hostile targets were positioned in windows and doorways, creating what appeared to be an impossible situation. Previous teams had either retreated or suffered heavy simulated casualties trying to push through. Sarah studied the layout for exactly 30 seconds. Then she moved. What happened next left Morrison speechless. Sarah identified a route through the buildings that no one else had seen, using cover and concealment with the expertise of someone who had done this for real. Her movements were precise and economical, each step calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining clear fields of fire. Jackson struggled to keep up, calling out questions that Sarah answered with gestures rather than words. She engaged targets with mechanical precision, never missing, never hesitating. In 12 minutes, they had cleared a course that typically took teams over 30 minutes to complete, and they did it without taking a single simulated hit. The other recruits gathered around as Sarah and Jackson emerged from the course. Jackson was breathing hard and grinning with excitement. "Did you see that?" he said to anyone who would listen. She knew exactly where every target would be. It was like she had a map in her head. Sarah said nothing, simply checking her equipment and preparing for the next exercise. But Morrison had seen enough. He called for a break and approached her while the others discussed the morning's events. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him with those calm, assessing eyes. "About what, sir?" "About who you really are, and about why someone with your skills is pretending to be a basic recruit." For the first time since he had met her, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. Just for a moment he saw something behind those professional eyes, a weariness that spoke of things seen and done that most people could never imagine. "My records speak for themselves." "Captain," she said carefully. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice so the other recruits couldn't hear. "Your records are fiction. I've been training soldiers for 15 years, and I know the difference between someone who learned to shoot at summer camp and someone who has taken lives in combat." "The question is, why are you here?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the other recruits as they practiced reloading drills. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes, Captain, the best place to hide is in plain sight." Before Morrison could respond, she walked away to rejoin the training group, but her words echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. Hide from what? Or from whom? And what kind of past required someone with her obvious skills to disappear into the anonymity of basic training? As the day progressed, Morrison found himself watching Sarah with new eyes. Every movement, every decision, every subtle reaction to the training scenarios revealed layers of experience that her file couldn't explain. She was a puzzle, and Morrison was determined to solve it. But deep down, he was beginning to suspect that some puzzles were dangerous to solve. Sarah Chen wasn't just hiding her identity, she was hiding from something, and Morrison was starting to wonder if his curiosity might put them both at risk. 3 days passed before Morrison got his answer, and it came in the most unexpected way possible. The base alarm system shattered the early morning quiet with its urgent wail, sending everyone into immediate action. An emergency briefing was called for all personnel, and Morrison found himself sitting in the packed auditorium alongside his training recruits. Colonel Anderson took the stage with a grim expression. Behind him, a large screen displayed satellite images of a remote compound. "We have a situation," he announced. "Intelligence indicates that a high-value terrorist target is holed up in this location, approximately 200 miles northeast of here. We have a narrow window of opportunity before he disappears again." The colonel continued his briefing, outlining a complex operation that would require precision shooting at extreme range. "The problem is geography," he explained, pointing to the terrain features on the map. "The target compound is situated in a valley with limited approach routes. Our best tactical position is a ridge approximately 200 yards from the target building." Morrison felt a chill as he understood the implications. A 200-yard shot was beyond the capability of most military snipers. It required not just exceptional marksmanship, but deep understanding of wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, and ballistics calculations that took years to master. "Unfortunately," Colonel Anderson continued, "our primary sniper team is currently deployed overseas, and our backup team is recovering from injuries sustained in last month's training accident. We need alternatives, and we need them now." Morrison glanced around the room, seeing the same realization on other faces. They didn't have anyone capable of making such a shot. The mission would have to be scrapped or postponed, giving the target time to escape. That's when Sarah stood up. Every head in the auditorium turned to look at the quiet recruit who had just volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission. Morrison's heart stopped as he realized what she was doing. "Recruit Chen," Colonel Anderson said, consulting his roster. "You're in the basic training program. This mission requires advanced precision shooting skills." Sarah's voice was steady and clear. "I can make the shot, sir." The auditorium erupted in whispers and murmurs. Morrison started to stand, ready to protect Sarah from what he assumed was a dangerous delusion, but something in her posture stopped him. This wasn't bravado or desperation. This was quiet confidence born from experience. Colonel Anderson studied Sarah for a long moment. "That's a 200-yard shot in variable wind conditions, recruit. Under combat stress, with lives depending on your accuracy. Are you certain you understand what you're volunteering for?" "Yes, sir. I understand completely." The colonel looked around the room, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded to one of his aides. "Take Recruit Chen to the range. I want to see what she can do." Within an hour, half the base had gathered at the long-range shooting facility. Word had spread quickly about the recruit who claimed she could make an impossible shot. Morrison stood with the other instructors, watching as Sarah was fitted with professional sniper gear. The target was placed at exactly 200 yards, the same distance as the actual mission. Wind flags showed variable conditions, with gusts that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Sarah studied the environment carefully, noting wind patterns and calculating variables with the methodical approach of someone who had done this before. She settled into position behind the rifle, and something remarkable happened. The nervous energy that had filled the crowd began to fade as people recognized they were watching a professional at work. Sarah's breathing slowed, her movements became economical and precise. This was no longer a recruit training exercise. This was a master sniper preparing for a critical shot. The first shot rang out across the range. Through the spotting scope, the range officer called out the result. "Dead center." The crowd stirred, but Sarah was already chambering another round. The second shot followed 10 seconds later. Another perfect hit. Then a third. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical precision, despite the challenging conditions. Colonel Anderson approached Morrison during the demonstration. "Captain, what do you know about this recruit?" Morrison shook his head slowly. "Apparently nothing at all, sir." When Sarah completed her demonstration, hitting 15 consecutive targets at extreme range, the silence was deafening. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was world-class precision shooting. Colonel Anderson made his decision on the spot. "Recruit Chen, you're temporarily assigned to this mission. We deploy at 1800 hours. He turned to the crowd. "Everything you've seen here today is classified. No one discusses this outside of official channels." As the crowd dispersed, Morrison approached Sarah. She was cleaning the rifle with the same methodical care she had shown during training, but now he saw it for what it really was. The routine of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time he saw a glimpse of the person behind the facade. "Someone who made a promise a long time ago," she said. "A promise to use these skills only when absolutely necessary." Morrison understood that he was seeing only the tip of an iceberg. Sarah Chen wasn't just a skilled marksman, she was something else entirely. The question that haunted him as she prepared for the mission was whether the military knew what kind of weapon they had just activated. As evening approached and the mission team prepared to deploy, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of what one person could accomplish when everything was on the line. The mission launched under cover of darkness. Morrison had volunteered to serve as Sarah's spotter, partly out of curiosity and partly out of concern for the quiet recruit who had suddenly become the most important person on the operation. As their helicopter approached the insertion point, he studied Sarah's profile in the dim cabin lighting. She sat motionless, eyes closed, breathing deeply and evenly. Her hands rested calmly on her weapon, and there was no trace of the nervousness that affected even experienced soldiers before combat operations. Morrison had seen this kind of pre-mission calm before, but only in the most elite operators he had worked with during his Special Forces days. The helicopter set them down on a rocky outcropping 3 miles from their target position. The team would have to navigate difficult terrain in complete darkness to reach the ridge that overlooked the terrorist compound. Sarah moved with the rest of the team, her steps sure and silent despite the challenging ground. During the long approach march, Morrison began to piece together more clues about Sarah's background. She navigated by the stars without checking her GPS, moved through rough terrain without stumbling, and seemed to anticipate obstacles before they appeared. These were skills that took years to develop, not something learned in basic training. When they reached their position on the ridge, Sarah immediately began studying the target area through her scope. The terrorist compound lay spread out in the valley below, exactly as the satellite images had shown. But Sarah wasn't just looking at the buildings. She was reading the environment like a book written in wind patterns, light conditions, and atmospheric variables. Distance confirmed at 247 yards, Morrison reported through his spotting scope. Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope, her movements precise and economical. "Wind is variable, averaging 8 to 12 miles per hour from the northwest," she said quietly. "Temperature differential between our position and the target will affect bullet drop by approximately 2 inches. Morrison was impressed by her technical knowledge, but what struck him more was her absolute calm. They were about to attempt a shot that would challenge the best snipers in the military, and Sarah showed no more stress than if she were back on the training range. At 0347 hours, their target appeared. Intelligence reports had been accurate. The terrorist leader emerged from the main building and began walking toward a vehicle. Sarah tracked him through her scope, her breathing slow and controlled. "I have the target," she whispered. Morrison confirmed the identification through his own scope. "Positive ID. You have authorization to engage when ready." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, she held her position, reading conditions that were invisible to everyone else on the team. Wind, temperature, humidity, the slight movement of air currents in the valley. All of these factors had to be calculated and compensated for in real time. The shot, when it came, surprised everyone except Sarah. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and through their scopes they watched the target drop immediately. The shot had been perfect, traveling over 200 yards to find its mark with surgical precision. But what happened next revealed the true extent of Sarah's abilities. Instead of celebrating or showing relief, she immediately began scanning for additional targets. Her movements were mechanical, professional, as if this was just another day at the office. Secondary targets emerging from the building, she reported calmly. Through his scope, Morrison watched as several armed figures rushed from the compound, seeking cover and trying to locate the source of the shot. Sarah tracked them with patient precision, waiting for clear shots that wouldn't risk civilian casualties. Over the next 20 minutes, she engaged 4 additional targets at ranges between 800 and 100 yards. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly accurate. Morrison had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just exceptional marksmanship, it was artistry performed under combat conditions. When the engagement was over, the compound fell silent. Sarah finally relaxed her position behind the rifle, but Morrison noticed she continued scanning the area for potential threats. Her situational awareness never decreased even after the mission was complete. "Outstanding work," the team leader reported over the radio. "All primary and secondary targets neutralized. Mission complete." As they prepared to move to their extraction point, Morrison couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "How many times have you done this before?" Sarah was field stripping her rifle, preparing it for transport. She paused for a moment, looking out over the valley where the operation had just concluded. "More times than I care to remember," she said quietly. The extraction went smoothly, but during the helicopter ride back to base, Morrison found himself studying Sarah with new understanding. This wasn't a recruit who had gotten lucky. This was someone with extensive combat experience. Someone who had performed precision shooting operations under the most demanding conditions imaginable. As they approached the base, Sarah seemed to retreat back into her recruit persona. The professional sniper who had just completed an impossible mission was replaced by the quiet, unassuming woman who had been training with the other recruits. But Morrison had seen behind the mask now, and he knew he could never look at her the same way again. The debriefing was classified and brief. Sarah's performance was officially recorded as exceptional, and she was returned to the training program as if nothing had happened. But Morrison knew that everyone who had witnessed the mission would remember what they had seen for the rest of their careers. As Sarah rejoined the other recruits for morning training, Morrison realized that he was looking at someone extraordinary. The question that haunted him was how many other impossible missions she had completed, and what had driven her to hide among basic recruits instead of serving with the elite units where her skills belonged. 2 weeks after the mission, Morrison was still trying to understand Sarah Chen. She had returned to the training program as if nothing had happened, performing at the same high level, but maintaining her low profile among the other recruits. The classified nature of the operation meant that most people on the base had no idea what she had accomplished. But Morrison couldn't let it go. Late one evening, he was working in his office when he received an encrypted email from his contact in military intelligence. The message was brief. "Meet me at the old supply depot at 2200 hours. Come alone. What you learn about Chen stays between us." Morrison arrived at the abandoned building to find a man in civilian clothes waiting for him. Agent Williams was someone Morrison had worked with on classified operations years earlier. His presence meant that Sarah's story was more complex than Morrison had imagined. "You've been asking questions about Sarah Chen," Williams said without preamble. "Questions that have reached some very high levels. People are wondering why a training instructor is so interested in a basic recruit's background." Morrison studied his old colleague's face in the dim light. "Because that recruit just completed a precision shooting mission that would challenge the best snipers in the world. And she did it like she was ordering coffee." Williams nodded slowly. "What I'm about to tell you never leaves this conversation. Sarah Chen isn't her real name. She's been operating under deep cover for the past 8 months, trying to disappear from a situation that went very bad." The agent pulled out a tablet and showed Morrison a series of classified files. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah's real name was Elena Vasquez, and she had been one of the military's most elite precision shooters. Her record showed deployments in Afghanistan, Syria, and several other locations that were heavily redacted. 56 confirmed kills, Williams said quietly, all at ranges exceeding 800 yards. She holds the record for the longest confirmed kill shot by any active military sniper, 20 to 100 yards in mountainous terrain, with variable wind conditions. Morrison stared at the files, trying to process what he was learning. Why is someone with this record hiding in basic training? Williams closed the tablet and leaned against a wooden crate. Because 18 months ago, Elena was part of a classified operation that went sideways. Her spotter was killed, and she had to complete the mission alone while under heavy enemy fire. She took out 12 targets in a running firefight that lasted over 6 hours. The story that emerged was one of extraordinary courage and devastating personal cost. Elena had saved an entire convoy of humanitarian workers, but the psychological toll of the operation had been severe. She had requested extraction from active sniper operations and disappeared into the military bureaucracy, seeking anonymity and a chance to heal from the trauma of war. The problem, Williams continued, is that her skills make her a target. Several enemy organizations have placed bounties on her head, and there are people within our own government who want to use her for operations that exist in legal gray areas. Morrison began to understand why Sarah had seemed so determined to remain invisible. She wasn't just hiding from her past. She was hiding from people who wanted to exploit her extraordinary abilities. So what happens now? Morrison asked. Williams was quiet for a long moment. That depends on her. And on you. The mission she completed last week has reminded certain people that Elena Vasquez still exists. There will be pressure to bring her back into active sniper operations. Morrison felt a surge of protectiveness toward the quiet woman who had been training under his supervision. What if she doesn't want to go back? Then she'll need allies. People who understand what she's been through and are willing to help her maintain her cover. Williams fixed Morrison with a steady gaze. People like you. The next morning, Morrison found Sarah on the shooting range early, practicing with the same methodical precision he had come to expect. But now he saw it differently. This wasn't just practice, it was therapy. Each shot was a way of maintaining control in a world that had asked too much of her. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Mind if I join you? Sarah lowered her rifle and looked at him with those calm, assessing eyes. It's your range, Captain. They shot in comfortable silence for several minutes before Morrison spoke. Elena, Sarah's hands stilled on her weapon. For a long moment she didn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was wondering when someone would figure it out. Morrison set down his rifle and turned to face her fully. Your secret is safe with me. But there are people who know about the mission last week. People who might want to pull you back into operations you're not ready for. Sarah was quiet, staring at the targets downrange. I've killed 56 people, Captain. 56 human beings who had families, dreams, and hopes just like everyone else. I know they were enemies. I know it was necessary, but that doesn't make it easier to live with. Morrison understood the weight she carried. He had seen it in other soldiers who had been asked to do impossible things in service of their country. What do you want to happen now? I want to train new soldiers. I want to teach them how to stay alive without having to carry the burden I carry. I want to use my skills to prepare others instead of taking more lives. She looked at him directly, but I know that might not be possible. Morrison made a decision that would change both their lives. Then we'll make it possible. Whatever it takes. As they packed up their equipment, Morrison realized that protecting Sarah Chen, Elena Vasquez, had become more than just a professional obligation. It had become a mission that would test everything he believed about loyalty, duty, and the price of service to one's country. The confrontation Morrison had been dreading came 3 days later. He was in his office reviewing training schedules when Colonel Anderson entered with 2 men in expensive suits. Their bearing and the way they studied everything in the room immediately identified them as intelligence operatives. Captain Morrison, Colonel Anderson said, his voice strained. These gentlemen are here about Recruit Chen. The older of the 2 men stepped forward. I'm Deputy Director Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to speak with Elena Vasquez immediately. Morrison kept his expression neutral, though his heart was racing. I'm not familiar with that name, sir. Are you referring to Recruit Chen? Harrison smiled coldly. Captain, we know exactly who she is and what she's capable of. Her performance on the recent mission has been noted at the highest levels. We have an operation that requires her specific skill set. Before Morrison could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She must have been summoned by someone else because she was already dressed in full uniform, her posture indicating she knew exactly what this meeting was about. Gentlemen, she said calmly, stepping into the office. Harrison studied her with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating a valuable asset. Ms. Vasquez, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. There's a target in Eastern Europe that presents challenges similar to what you handled last week. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Morrison noticed her hands clench slightly at her sides. I'm currently assigned to basic training, sir. Perhaps another sniper would be more appropriate for your mission. There is no other sniper, Harrison said flatly. The target is a high-value arms dealer who has been supplying weapons to terrorist organizations. He's heavily protected and maintains residences in locations that would require precision shooting at extreme range. Your record indicates you're the only active military sniper capable of making the necessary shots. Morrison watched as Sarah wrestled with the request. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to serve her country warring with the need to protect herself from further psychological damage. What's the range? She asked quietly. Harrison consulted a file. Primary target would be approximately 1,800 yards. Secondary targets at various ranges up to 1,500 yards. The operation would require sustained precision shooting over several hours. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Morrison could practically see her calculating not just the ballistic challenges, but the emotional cost of what was being asked of her. I need time to consider, she said finally. Harrison's expression hardened. This isn't a request, Ms. Vasquez. This is a direct order from the Secretary of Defense. You deploy in 48 hours. That's when Morrison made his decision. He stepped between Harrison and Sarah, his voice firm and clear. Deputy Director, Recruit Chen is currently under my command and assigned to a training program that is essential to military readiness. Any reassignment would need to go through proper channels and consider the impact on current operations. Harrison looked at Morrison with barely concealed irritation. Captain, you're interfering with a matter of national security. No, sir. I'm protecting a soldier under my command from being exploited. Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years leading troops in combat. Elena Vasquez has given more to this country than most people could survive. She deserves the right to choose her own path forward. The tension in the room was palpable. Colonel Anderson looked uncomfortable, caught between his respect for Morrison and the pressure from the intelligence operatives. Sarah stood motionless, watching the confrontation unfold. Finally, Sarah spoke. I'll take the mission. Morrison turned to her in surprise. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she said, her voice steady. But I have conditions. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You're not in a position to negotiate conditions. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out something that made everyone in the room freeze. It was a small tarnished coin with markings that were barely visible. But Morrison recognized what it was, a kill coin, marked with 56 small notches. This represents every life I've taken in service to my country, Sarah said, holding the coin so everyone could see it. 56 people who will never go home to their families because I was very good at my job. She set the coin on Morrison's desk with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the silent room. My condition is simple. After this mission, Elena Vasquez disappears permanently. No more operations, no more requests, no more attempts to pull me back into active sniper duty. I want to train soldiers and live a quiet life. In exchange, I'll complete your mission and eliminate your targets with the same precision I've always provided. Harrison stared at the coin, clearly understanding its significance. After a long moment, he nodded. Agreed. One final mission, and then Elena Vasquez officially dies in a training accident. Sarah Chen continues her service in a training capacity. Sarah picked up the coin and returned it to her pocket. Then we have a deal. As the intelligence operatives left to make arrangements, Morrison found himself alone with Sarah. She was staring out the window at the recruits practicing on the obstacle course. Why? Morrison asked. Why take the mission if you don't want to go back? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because if I don't, they'll never stop asking. Better to complete one final operation on my terms than to spend the rest of my career looking over my shoulder. 6 months later, the official record shows that Elena Vasquez died in a training accident during a classified operation. Sarah Chen was promoted to sergeant and assigned permanently to the military training program, where she became known as one of the most effective instructors in the service. Morrison never asked about the mission in Eastern Europe, and Sarah never volunteered details. But sometimes when she thought no one was looking, he would see her touch the pocket where she kept her kill coin, a reminder of the price she had paid for her extraordinary skills, and the choice she had, made to use them in service of training others rather than taking more lives. The legend of Elena Vasquez lived on in classified files and whispered stories among elite military units. But Sarah Chen found peace in teaching young soldiers how to survive and return home to their families, using her hard-won experience to prepare the next generation for the challenges they would face. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest service she could provide, ensuring that others wouldn't have to carry the same burden she had borne for so many years.